The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned airfield as Marcus Blackwood made his way through the rusted gate. His weathered hands gripped a bucket filled with cleaning supplies, the same routine he had followed for the past 8 years. The locals in the small town of Millbrook thought him peculiar, a man in his 70s who spent his days caring for a forgotten piece of military history that most people had written off as scrap metal. The aircraft sat in the center of the field like a sleeping giant. It was a Douglas C-47 Skytrain, its olive-drab paint faded and peeling in places, but Marcus treated it with the reverence of a cathedral custodian. Every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, he would arrive with his supplies and begin the meticulous process of cleaning, polishing, and maintaining the old warbird. Most people who passed by assumed Marcus was just an old man with too much time on his hands, perhaps a veteran with a nostalgic attachment to military aircraft. They weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Marcus Blackwood carried secrets that ran deeper than anyone in Millbrook could imagine, secrets that were buried beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy and the simple act of caring for an abandoned plane. The airfield itself had been closed since 1962, when the military decided it was no longer needed for training purposes. The town had grown around it, and developers had eyed the land hungrily for years. But legal complications and bureaucratic red tape had kept the property in limbo. The C-47 had been left behind, deemed too expensive to move and not worth the effort to scrap. That's when Marcus had first appeared, asking the current property owner if he could maintain the aircraft as a volunteer. Harold Jenkins, who owned the auto shop in town, often watched Marcus from his garage across the street. "That old man's been out there every single day for 8 years, he would tell his customers. "Rain or shine, snow or heat wave. Never seen dedication like it. He talks to that plane like it's alive." Harold wasn't wrong about the talking. Marcus did speak to the aircraft, sharing stories and memories as he worked. He would run his cloth along the fuselage, checking for new areas of corrosion, and whisper about places he'd been and people he'd known. The plane had become his confidant, the only witness to the fragments of his past that occasionally escaped his lips. On this particular morning, Marcus noticed something different. There were fresh tire tracks in the gravel near the gate, and someone had left footprints in the dew-covered grass around the aircraft. His military training, dormant but never forgotten, immediately kicked in. He set down his bucket and walked a careful perimeter, noting the size and pattern of the boot prints. Whoever had been here was methodical, professional, not the random curiosity of a passerby. As he began his daily routine, starting with the nose section and working his way back, Marcus allowed his mind to wander to safer memories. He thought about his daughter, Sarah, who lived in California with her family. She called every Sunday, always asking when he was going to sell the little house in Millbrook and come live closer to them. He could never find the words to explain why he needed to stay, why this abandoned airfield had become the center of his world. The work was therapeutic. Each stroke of the polishing cloth, each inspection of rivets and joints, each careful cleaning of the cockpit windows, it all served a purpose beyond simple maintenance. It kept his hands busy and his mind focused on the present, away from the shadows that sometimes crept in during the quiet moments. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell from the local historical society had visited him several times over the years, trying to convince him to help her turn the aircraft into an official memorial. She was a well-meaning woman in her 60s who had moved to Millbrook after retiring from a career in museum curation. She recognized the historical value of the C-47 and couldn't understand why Marcus seemed resistant to her offers of help and funding. "Mr. Blackwood," she had said during her last visit 3 months ago, "this aircraft could be properly restored and displayed. We could create educational materials, bring in school groups, honor the history of these remarkable planes. But we need your cooperation. You're the only one who seems to understand its significance." Marcus had politely declined, as he always did. He appreciated her passion, but he couldn't risk the attention that would come with an official restoration project. Too many questions would be asked, too many records might be examined, too many old connections might surface. The delicate balance he had maintained for 8 years could crumble in an instant. As the morning progressed, Marcus worked his way around the aircraft's exterior, paying special attention to the areas where moisture could cause damage. The C-47 was remarkably well preserved for its age, thanks partly to his dedicated care, but also to its robust construction. These planes had been built to withstand the rigors of war, to carry paratroopers and cargo across hostile territories, to land on improvised airstrips and take off again under enemy fire. He paused at the large cargo door, running his hand along its frame. This was where he always felt the strongest connection to the aircraft's history and his own past. How many brave young men and women had passed through this opening? How many missions had this particular plane flown? The records had been lost or scattered long ago, but Marcus sometimes wondered if he had ever crossed paths with this specific aircraft during his own service years. The sound of an approaching car broke his concentration. Marcus looked up to see a black sedan pulling through the gate, its government license plates immediately recognizable to his trained eye. His heart rate quickened, but he forced himself to continue working, keeping his movements casual and unhurried. After all these years, had someone finally connected the dots? The car parked near the aircraft, and 2 men in dark suits emerged. They walked with the confident bearing of federal agents, their eyes scanning the area with professional thoroughness. Marcus continued polishing a section of the wing, but every fiber of his being was alert and ready. "Mr. Blackwood?" The younger of the 2 men approached him with a friendly smile. "I'm Agent Morrison from the FBI. This is Agent Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions if you have a moment." Marcus set down his cloth and turned to face them, his expression neutral but cooperative. "Of course. How can I help you, gentlemen?" "We're investigating some irregularities in historical military records," Agent Morrison explained. "Your name came up as someone who might have information about aircraft movements in the 1950s. We understand you have extensive knowledge about military aviation." The question was vague enough to be a fishing expedition, but specific enough to suggest they had at least some information about his background. Marcus chose his words carefully. "I was in the service for a while, yes. But that was a long time ago. I'm not sure how much help I'd be with historical records." Agent Chen stepped closer, his eyes studying Marcus with the intensity of someone who made a living reading people. "We're particularly interested in the period between 1952 and 1954. There are some gaps in the documentation from that time, and we're trying to piece together certain operations that might have involved aircraft like this one." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but his expression remained calm. Those were the exact years he had hoped never to discuss again. The years when he had been involved in operations so classified that most of the participants had taken their secrets to their graves. He had assumed that with the passage of time and the death of his former colleagues, those particular shadows would never resurface. "I'm afraid I don't recall much from that period," Marcus said evenly. "As you can imagine, after all these years, the details tend to blur together." Agent Morrison nodded understandingly, but Marcus could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Of course, but perhaps seeing this aircraft every day helps jog some memories. We understand you've been maintaining it for quite some time." "It's just a hobby," Marcus replied. "I've always been interested in military history. This old bird was going to waste, so I volunteered to keep her from falling apart completely." The agents exchanged a glance, and Marcus knew they weren't buying his story entirely. Agent Chen pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. "Mr. Blackwood, were you ever stationed at Templeton Air Base in Nevada?" The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he managed to keep his reaction hidden. Templeton Air Base had been erased from official records decades ago, its very existence denied by the government. The fact that these agents knew about it meant they had access to information that should have been buried forever. "I don't recall ever being stationed there," Marcus said, technically telling the truth. He had never been permanently stationed at Templeton, but he had spent considerable time there during the classified operations of the early 1950s. Agent Morrison stepped back and gestured toward the aircraft. "This is a beautiful example of a C-47. Do you know its service history?" "Not specifically," Marcus answered. "The records were missing when I started working on her. I assumed she was just a training aircraft that got left behind when the base closed." "Interesting," Agent Chen said, making a note. "Because our preliminary research suggests this particular aircraft might have been involved in some rather unique missions. Missions that someone went to great lengths to erase from the official record." Marcus felt the walls closing in, but he maintained his composure. "Well, these old planes all have stories, I suppose. Most of them are lost to time." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with the agents asking seemingly casual questions about his background, his daily routine, and his knowledge of military aviation. Marcus answered truthfully when he could and deflected when he had to, all while continuing to work on the aircraft. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of his maintenance routine, providing a calming counterpoint to the tension of the interrogation. Finally, the agents prepared to leave. Agent Morrison handed Marcus a business card. "If you remember anything that might be helpful, please give us a call. We appreciate your cooperation." After they drove away, Marcus stood alone beside the aircraft, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. For 8 years, he had lived quietly in Millbrook, convinced that his past was buried deeply enough to never resurface. The appearance of these FBI agents changed everything. Someone somewhere had started pulling threads that could unravel the carefully constructed life he had built. As he resumed his work, Marcus's mind raced through the possibilities. What had triggered this investigation? Were there other survivors from the Templeton operations who might have talked? Had some classified document been declassified that contained his name? Or was this just a routine review of old cases that happened to intersect with his hidden history? The C-47 had been his sanctuary for so long, a place where he could find peace in simple, honest work. Now it felt like a spotlight, drawing unwanted attention to secrets that were supposed to remain buried. But Marcus Blackwood was not a man who gave up easily. He had survived things that would have broken lesser men, and he wasn't about to let a couple of federal agents destroy the quiet life he had built. As the sun reached its zenith, Marcus continued his methodical maintenance of the aircraft, each motion practiced and deliberate. But now his mind was working on a different kind of maintenance, calculating risks, reviewing options, and preparing for whatever storm might be coming his way. The game had begun again, whether he wanted it or not, and Marcus Blackwood was determined to play it on his own terms. 3 weeks had passed since the FBI agent's visit, and Marcus had begun to hope their investigation had moved on to other leads. He maintained his daily routine with the C-47, but now he worked with heightened awareness, constantly scanning his surroundings for signs of surveillance. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts told him the agents would be back. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, as Marcus was cleaning the aircraft's propeller blades, he noticed a figure approaching from the direction of town. Unlike his previous visitors, this man walked with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. Even in civilian clothes, everything about his posture and movement screamed authority and command presence. The man was tall and lean, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the airfield in a single sweep. As he drew closer, Marcus noted the quality of his clothing and the way he carried himself. This was someone accustomed to being in charge, someone who didn't ask permission. Mr. Blackwood? The man's voice carried the crisp authority of someone who had spent decades giving orders. I'm General William Ashford, retired. I wonder if we could have a conversation. Marcus set down his cleaning cloth and straightened up, automatically falling into a more formal posture despite himself. Something about this man demanded respect. And Marcus could feel the old military protocols clicking into place in his mind. General, Marcus acknowledged with a slight nod. What can I do for you? General Ashford walked slowly around the C-47, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of Marcus's maintenance work. He ran his hand along the fuselage with the familiarity of someone who had spent considerable time around military aircraft. When he reached the cargo door, he paused, studying something that seemed to catch his attention. Beautiful work, the general said finally. You've kept her in remarkable condition, better than most museum pieces I've seen. Thank you, sir. She deserves the care. The general continued his inspection, moving to examine the cockpit windows and the engine nacelles. Marcus watched nervously, wondering what exactly the man was looking for. After several minutes, General Ashford returned to where Marcus was standing. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe directness is the only approach that will work here. I know who you are, and I know what you did during your service years. The question is whether you're going to continue pretending to be a simple aircraft enthusiast, or whether we're going to have an honest conversation about your past. Marcus felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, General. Marcus James Blackwood, serial number 288475593, former member of the 1st Special Operations Squadron. Participated in classified missions between 1952 and 1954, including several operations that officially never happened. Presumed killed in action during a mission over Eastern Europe in September 1954, but actually extracted and placed in a witness protection program after providing critical intelligence about Soviet aircraft capabilities. The words hit Marcus like hammer blows. No one outside a very small circle of intelligence officials should have known those details, and most of those people were long dead. Marcus sank down onto a wooden crate he used as a makeshift seat, his legs suddenly unsteady. How? Was all he managed to say. General Ashford pulled out a folding chair from the back of his car and set it up across from Marcus. Because, Mr. Blackwood, I've been looking for you for 30 years. You see, I was a young lieutenant in intelligence back then, assigned to debrief the survivors of the Templeton operations. Your file crossed my desk in 1978, and something about your case never sat right with me. Marcus studied the general's face, searching for any sign of deception or threat. What he saw instead was the expression of a man who had spent decades carrying questions he couldn't answer. The official record says you died in the crash of a reconnaissance aircraft over Czechoslovakia, the general continued. But there were inconsistencies in the reports, gaps in the timeline that didn't make sense. When I tried to investigate further, I was told the files were classified beyond my clearance level and that I should focus on other cases. And you let it go? Marcus asked. For a while, yes. But I kept copies of what I had seen, and over the years, as I rose in rank and gained higher clearances, I kept digging. Piece by piece, I put together what really happened. The extraction, the debriefing, the new identity. What I couldn't figure out was where you had gone after the program ended. Marcus remained silent, unsure how much he should reveal. General Ashford seemed genuine, but 30 years of hiding had made trust a luxury he couldn't afford. Mr. Blackwood, or do you prefer Marcus, I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here because there are people who need to know what you saw during those missions. The intelligence you provided in 1954 may be crucial to understanding some current national security issues. Current issues? Marcus finally spoke. General, that was 70 years ago. Whatever I knew then is ancient history. Not necessarily. The general leaned forward, his expression intense. We're seeing aircraft today with capabilities that shouldn't exist based on our understanding of technological development. Some of the design characteristics match descriptions in your debriefing reports from 1954. We think the Soviets may have been working on technologies back then that we're only now beginning to understand. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The missions he had flown, the things he had seen and reported, he had assumed they were isolated incidents, experimental programs that had died with the Cold War. The possibility that those technologies had survived and evolved was terrifying. General, I told everything I knew to the debriefers in 1954, every detail, every observation. If that information is in the files, why do you need me? Because the files are incomplete, General Ashford said grimly. Large portions were destroyed during a security review in 1961. Some sections were declassified and released to researchers, but key technical details were redacted. We need someone who was actually there, who saw these aircraft with their own eyes, to fill in the gaps. Marcus stood up and walked to the C-47, placing his hand on the cold metal of the fuselage. This aircraft had become his anchor, his connection to a simpler time when his only responsibility was keeping something beautiful and functional in good condition. The idea of returning to the world of classified briefings and national security implications felt like stepping back into a nightmare he had worked hard to escape. "What makes you think my memory is any better than your files after all these years?" Marcus asked. "Because you've been maintaining this aircraft with obsessive attention to detail for 8 years, the general replied. "Because when I watch you work, I see someone who notices everything, remembers everything, and cares about precision. Those are exactly the qualities that made you such a valuable intelligence asset in the first place." The general stood and joined Marcus beside the aircraft. "There's something else you should know. The FBI agents who visited you 3 weeks ago weren't conducting a routine historical review. They're part of a joint task force investigating UFO sightings that have been increasing over the past 5 years. Some of these sightings describe aircraft with flight characteristics that match the Soviet experimental designs you reported in 1954. Marcus turned to stare at the general. "UFOs? You're talking about flying saucers and little green men?" "I'm talking about unidentified aircraft with capabilities that defy our current understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion. Aircraft that can accelerate from 0 to hypersonic speeds instantaneously, make 90-degree turns at high velocity, and hover motionless before disappearing from radar screens. The kind of capabilities that the Soviet experimental aircraft you encountered in 1954 were reportedly testing." The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. If the technologies he had witnessed decades ago had been developed and perfected, it could explain many of the mysterious aircraft sightings that had puzzled military and civilian observers for years. But it also meant that foreign powers might possess aerial capabilities far beyond anything the United States military could deploy. "General, even if what you're saying is true, I'm not sure how much help I can be. I was a pilot, not an engineer. I saw these aircraft in flight, but I didn't understand the technical principles behind their capabilities." "You understood enough to provide detailed observations about their performance characteristics," the general said. "Flight patterns, acceleration rates, maneuvering capabilities, sound signatures. That kind of observational data is exactly what our current investigators need to develop countermeasures." Marcus walked around to the other side of the aircraft, needing time to think. His entire adult life had been built on the foundation of leaving his past behind, of becoming an ordinary man living an ordinary life in a small town where nobody asked difficult questions. The idea of returning to the world of classified operations and national security implications was deeply unsettling. But there was another consideration. If foreign powers really did possess the kind of advanced aircraft capabilities the general was describing, then American lives could be at risk. Marcus had served his country once before, and the values that had motivated his service hadn't changed, even if his circumstances had. What exactly would you need from me? Marcus asked finally. A complete debriefing session with our technical analysts. We'd bring in aerospace engineers, intelligence specialists, and UFO investigators to go through your memories systematically. Every detail you can remember about the aircraft you encountered, the missions you flew, the conversations you overheard. And after that, you go back to your life here in Millbrook. We're not asking you to return to active service. We just need your knowledge. Marcus considered the offer carefully. The rational part of his mind told him to decline politely and hope the whole situation would go away. But his instincts told him that the situation had already gone too far for simple denial to work. The FBI investigation would continue, and eventually they would uncover enough information to expose his identity anyway. At least if he cooperated with General Ashford, he might have some control over the process. "How do I know I can trust you?" Marcus asked. "Because I could have exposed your identity to the FBI agents and let them handle this investigation. Instead, I tracked you down myself, and I'm offering you a choice. Work with me directly and we keep this between us. Refuse, and eventually the official investigators will find you anyway, and they won't be as considerate of your desire for privacy." It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Marcus had been found, and his carefully constructed civilian life was already compromised. The only question was whether he would cooperate voluntarily or wait for the authorities to compel his participation. "If I agree to this debriefing, I want certain guarantees," Marcus said. "My daughter and her family are not to be contacted or involved in any way. My identity remains classified at the highest levels. And when this is over, I want assurance that I'll be left alone to continue my life here." "Agreed," the general said immediately. "We'll conduct the debriefing at a secure facility, and your participation will be compartmentalized to the highest classification levels. As far as the official record is concerned, you'll remain a consultant who provided historical perspective on Cold War aviation incidents." Marcus took one more look around the airfield, at the peaceful routine that had defined his life for the past 8 years. Tomorrow, everything would change. He would step back into a world of secrets and shadows, of classified briefings and national security implications. But perhaps it was time. Perhaps he had been hiding long enough. "When do you need my answer?" Marcus asked. "I need it now," the general replied. "The briefing is scheduled for next week, and we need time to make the security arrangements." Marcus extended his hand to General Ashford. "Then you have it. I'll do the debriefing." As they shook hands, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling over him. He had spent 8 years trying to escape his past, only to discover that the past was never really gone. It had just been waiting for the right moment to resurface. Now, as he prepared to return to a world he had thought he'd left behind forever, Marcus wondered if he would ever again find the peace he had discovered in the simple act of polishing an abandoned aircraft. The secure facility was located 2 hours outside Washington, D.C., hidden behind multiple layers of security and administrative cover stories. As Marcus sat in the back of the unmarked government vehicle, watching the familiar Maryland countryside roll past, he felt like a man traveling backward through time. Every mile brought him closer to a world he had spent decades trying to forget. General Ashford sat across from him, reviewing files and occasionally making notes. During the 3-day period since their conversation at the airfield, the general had proven to be a man of his word. Marcus's departure from Millbrook had been handled discreetly, with a cover story about visiting his daughter in California. Mrs. Hartwell from the Historical Society had volunteered to check on the C-47 in his absence, never suspecting that her simple act of kindness was helping to maintain one of the most important cover stories in recent intelligence history. The facility itself was unremarkable from the outside, a collection of low buildings that could have housed any number of government agencies or private contractors. But Marcus recognized the telltale signs of serious security: multiple perimeter fences, strategically placed guard towers, and the kind of electronic surveillance equipment that suggested this was a place where very sensitive conversations took place. After passing through several security checkpoints, Marcus found himself in a comfortable conference room with a view of carefully manicured grounds. The room contained a large table, several chairs, and enough electronic equipment to record and analyze every word that would be spoken over the next several days. "Before we begin," General Ashford said, "I want you to meet the team that will be conducting your debriefing." Over the next few minutes, 5 people entered the room and took seats around the table. Dr. Sarah Chen was an aerospace engineer who specialized in unconventional propulsion systems. Dr. Michael Rodriguez was a physicist who had spent his career studying the theoretical possibilities of advanced flight technologies. Colonel Jennifer Walsh was an Air Force intelligence officer with expertise in foreign aircraft capabilities. Dr. Robert Kim was a psychologist trained in memory recovery techniques, and Agent Lisa Morrison was the FBI investigator who had visited Marcus at the airfield. Apparently, his cooperation had earned him a place on the team rather than making him a target of their investigation. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Kim began, "we want you to know that this debriefing will be conducted using the most advanced memory recovery techniques available. We understand that the events we're asking you to recall took place many years ago, but research has shown that traumatic or highly significant memories are often preserved with remarkable clarity, even decades later." Marcus nodded, settling back in his chair. "Where would you like me to start?" "Let's begin with your assignment to the Templeton Air Base operations," Colonel Walsh said, consulting her notes. "Can you describe the circumstances that led to your involvement in those missions?" Marcus closed his eyes, allowing his mind to drift back to the spring of 1952. The memories came flooding back with startling clarity. The classified briefing room where he had first learned about the Soviet aircraft sightings, the intensive training program that had prepared him for reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines, the feeling of excitement and terror that had accompanied his first flight into hostile airspace. "I was selected for the program because of my experience with experimental aircraft and my ability to provide detailed technical observations under combat conditions," Marcus began. "The briefing officer told us that Soviet test facilities had been observed conducting flights of aircraft with capabilities that shouldn't have been possible based on our understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion technology." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her interest obvious. "Can you describe the specific capabilities that were reported?" "Instantaneous acceleration from hover to what appeared to be hypersonic speeds. 90-degree turns at high velocity without any apparent deceleration. The ability to stop completely in midair and hover motionless for extended periods. And perhaps most disturbing, the ability to disappear from radar screens while remaining visually observable." Dr. Rodriguez made careful notes as Marcus spoke. "Did you personally witness all of these capabilities?" "During my third mission, in August of 1953, I observed a test flight at a facility approximately 60 miles north of Prague. I was positioned on a hilltop with binoculars and a camera, documenting what appeared to be a routine test of conventional Soviet aircraft. Then something else appeared." Marcus paused, the memory as vivid now as it had been 70 years ago. The aircraft was disc-shaped, approximately 40 feet in diameter, with a smooth metallic surface that reflected light in an unusual way. It emerged from a hangar at ground level, rose vertically to about 5,000 feet in less than 10 seconds, then began performing maneuvers that violated everything I thought I knew about the laws of physics. Agent Morrison looked up from her notes. "Can you be more specific about the maneuvers?" "It would accelerate horizontally at speeds that should have created massive sonic booms, but there was almost no sound. It would stop instantaneously and reverse direction without any apparent deceleration period. At one point, it flew in a perfect square pattern, making 90-degree turns at each corner while maintaining constant speed." No conventional aircraft could perform those maneuvers without tearing itself apart. Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez exchanged glances. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Chen said carefully, "the maneuvers you're describing match almost exactly the flight characteristics reported in recent UFO encounters. The ability to accelerate without sonic booms, the instantaneous direction changes, the hovering capabilities. These are all consistent with sightings that have been reported by military and civilian pilots over the past 5 years. You're suggesting that what I saw in 1953 was the same technology that's being reported today?" Marcus asked. "We're suggesting that it's possible," Colonel Walsh replied. "If the Soviets had developed this technology in the 1950s and continued refining it over the decades, it could explain many of the unidentified aircraft encounters that have puzzled our intelligence community." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "But that would mean they've had a 70-year head start on us in developing these capabilities. How is that possible?" Dr. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "That's exactly what we're trying to understand. The physics involved in the maneuvers you described shouldn't be achievable with any technology we've developed, even today. Either the Soviets discovered some fundamental principles about propulsion and aerodynamics that we've missed, or they had access to knowledge from another source entirely." "Another source?" Marcus asked. "There are theories," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully, "that some technological breakthroughs have come from studying crashed aircraft of unknown origin. Aircraft that themselves exhibited the kinds of capabilities you observed in 1953. The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Marcus had spent his military career focused on conventional threats and conventional technologies. The possibility that he had witnessed something that challenged the basic assumptions about human technological development was deeply unsettling. "Let's move on to your final mission," Colonel Walsh said, obviously eager to continue gathering information. "The one that resulted in your official death and extraction from Eastern Europe." Marcus's expression darkened. That mission had haunted his dreams for decades, and he wasn't sure he was ready to relive it in detail. But the faces around the table were expectant, and he realized that this information might be more crucial than he had imagined. "September 15th, 1954, Marcus began. "I was tasked with photographing a new facility that had been constructed in the mountains of eastern Czechoslovakia. Intelligence reports suggested that the Soviets were conducting advanced aircraft tests there, possibly involving the same technology I had observed the previous year." "What went wrong?" Dr. Kim asked gently. "Everything," Marcus replied. "My aircraft developed engine trouble about 50 miles from the target, and I was forced to make an emergency landing in a forest clearing. I managed to radio my position before the radio died, but I knew it would be hours before a rescue attempt could be mounted." Marcus paused, collecting his thoughts. The next part of the story was the most difficult to tell because it involved decisions that had probably saved his life, but had cost other people theirs. "I decided to continue the mission on foot. The target facility was only about 10 miles away, and I thought I could reach it, take the photographs, and return to the landing site before the rescue team arrived." "Did you reach the facility?" Agent Morrison asked. "Yes, but what I found there was beyond anything I had been prepared for. The facility wasn't just testing aircraft. They were reverse engineering technology that they clearly didn't fully understand themselves. I saw aircraft in various stages of disassembly, with components that looked nothing like conventional aviation technology." Dr. Chen leaned forward intently. "Can you describe these components?" "Smooth, seamless panels that seemed to be made from a single piece of material with no visible joints or fasteners. Power systems that had no apparent moving parts, but generated some kind of electromagnetic field strong enough to affect my watch and compass, and most disturbing, flight control systems that seemed to respond to something other than conventional mechanical or electronic inputs." "Other than conventional inputs?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. Marcus hesitated, knowing how his next statement would sound. They seemed to respond to thought. I watched a technician approach one of the partially assembled aircraft and place his hands on what appeared to be a control interface. The aircraft's various systems activated in sequence, but there were no visible controls or switches being manipulated. The room fell silent as the implications of Marcus's statement sank in. Finally, Dr. Kim spoke up. "Mr. Blackwood, are you suggesting that these aircraft were controlled by some form of direct neural interface?" "I'm telling you what I observed," Marcus replied. "Whether it was a neural interface or some other technology I didn't understand, I can't say. But the correlation between the technician's actions and the aircraft's responses was too precise to be coincidental." Colonel Walsh made more notes. "What happened after you made these observations?" "I was discovered by security patrols while trying to photograph the facility. In the firefight that followed, I was wounded and separated from my equipment. I managed to escape into the mountains, but I knew the Soviets would be searching for me with everything they had." "How were you extracted?" Agent Morrison asked. "I made contact with a resistance group that had been operating in the area. They agreed to help me reach a predetermined extraction point, but the journey took 3 days through hostile territory. By the time the rescue team found me, I was in critical condition from my wounds and exposure." "And that's when the decision was made to officially list you as killed in action?" Colonel Walsh asked. "The intelligence I had gathered about the facility was considered so sensitive that my handlers decided it was safer to let everyone believe I had died in the mission. A new identity was created for me, and I was placed in a witness protection program until the debriefing process was complete." Dr. Kim looked up from his notes. "Mr. Blackwood, you've provided us with remarkable detail about events that occurred 70 years ago. But I have to ask, is there anything else you observed during that final mission that you haven't told us? Any detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant, could be crucial to our current investigation." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with a memory he had tried to suppress for decades. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "There was something else at the facility, something I didn't include in my original debriefing because I wasn't sure anyone would believe me." "What was it?" General Ashford asked. "There were beings at the facility, non-human beings. They were working alongside the Soviet technicians, apparently providing guidance on the reverse engineering process." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and exchanged glances. Dr. Rodriguez was the first to find his voice. "Can you describe these beings?" "Humanoid, but clearly not human. About 4 feet tall, with large heads and eyes, very pale skin, and movements that seemed somehow coordinated in a way that suggested they were communicating with each other without speaking." Agent Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwood, are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" "I've spent 70 years questioning what I saw that day," Marcus replied. "But yes, I'm certain. The Soviets weren't just reverse engineering captured technology, they were receiving direct assistance from its original creators." The implications of Marcus's revelation transformed the entire scope of the investigation. If his observations were accurate, then the unidentified aircraft being reported today weren't just the result of advanced human technology. They represented ongoing contact between foreign governments and non-human intelligences. As the debriefing sessions continued over the following days, Marcus provided every detail he could remember about his encounters with the advanced aircraft and their mysterious operators. The team of specialists analyzed his testimony from every possible angle, comparing his descriptions with recent UFO reports and building a comprehensive picture of technological capabilities that challenged humanity's understanding of physics and engineering. When the debriefing finally concluded, General Ashford walked Marcus to the vehicle that would take him back to his quiet life in Millbrook. "Mr. Blackwood," the general said, "I want you to know that your cooperation has been invaluable to our national security. The information you've provided will help us develop countermeasures and protocols for dealing with these aircraft encounters." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we do what intelligence professionals do best. We analyze, we plan, and we prepare. Your part in this is over. You can return to your peaceful life with that old C-47. As the vehicle pulled away from the facility, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from a quiet retirement to the center of one of the most significant intelligence investigations in modern history. His carefully guarded secrets were no longer his alone, but perhaps that was for the best. The truth he had carried for so many years was finally serving its intended purpose, protecting the country he had sworn to defend. 3 weeks later, Marcus was back at the airfield in Millbrook, polishing the C-47 with the same meticulous care he had shown for 8 years. But now his work carried a different meaning. The aircraft was no longer just a connection to his past. It was a symbol of his continuing service to his country, a reminder that some duties never truly end, they just change form. Mrs. Hartwell from the Historical Society stopped by to check on him, pleased to see that his vacation had apparently done him good. She never suspected that the quiet man who spent his days caring for an abandoned aircraft had just provided crucial intelligence in one of the most important national security investigations of the modern era. As Marcus worked, he sometimes found himself looking up at the sky, wondering what other secrets were hidden among the clouds, what other technologies were being tested beyond the reach of conventional understanding. But those questions were no longer his responsibility. His duty now was simpler and more peaceful, to maintain this beautiful old aircraft and to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The C-47 gleamed in the afternoon sun, its polished surface reflecting the clouds above. To casual observers, it was just an old man's hobby, a nostalgic tribute to military history. But Marcus knew better. Sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows, performed by people whose names will never be known and whose contributions will never be publicly acknowledged. He had served his country in the shadows before, and in his own quiet way, he was serving it still.